To London as the group of 7 wealthy democracies wrapped up their first face-to-face summit in 2 years. Australia was only an observer, but Mr Morrison delivered a pledge to phase out government investment in coal-fired power generation. The US President left his mark on the summit, calling out China's human rights abuses before holding his first private audience with the Queen. Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports.
From the Cornish shores to Windsor Castle, Joe Biden inspected a guard of honour before he and the First Lady joined the Queen for tea. Her Majesty is no stranger to US presidents. She's met 14 during her almost 70-year reign.
She was very generous, very... I don't think she'd be insulted, but you've met my mother. She reminded me of my mother in terms of the look of her and just the generosity.
Scott Morrison will have his own royal encounter soon on the back of his G7 appearance, where he found friends keen to counter an assertive China.
I was very encouraged by the very strong support for the stand that Australia has taken very consistently in standing up for liberal democratic principles and in our own region.
The Big Seven are flexing some muscle. First and most urgently, they want a new probe into the origins of COVID-19.
As soon as possible. I can't underscore its urgency more than that.
And the leaders committed to calling out human rights abuses in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. On climate, they fell short of setting a timeline to end the use of coal-generated power, but did promise to stop international funding of new coal projects by the end of the year.
We're not a signatory to the G7 communique, and we participated today very positively in the discussion about climate change, and we're able to demonstrate once again that Australia's performance speaks loudly.
Now in London, Scott Morrison will set to work trying to secure a free trade agreement with the UK. But there remain substantial sticking points on agriculture, and the Prime Minister says he won't just sign any deal. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
The worst of the severe weather that battered Victoria last week has passed, but thousands of people are still without power and some are yet to return to their homes. Reporter Zalika Rizmal has more from Kalorama.
While the massive clean-up and recovery is continuing here in the Yarra Ranges after last week's ferocious storms, I'm here in Kalorama, one of the worst hit areas of the ranges. You can hear the chorus of chainsaws in the background, but have a look at these trees here. A row of trees about 60 metres high. They just look like they've been ripped up from their roots and toppled over row by row here in the valley. And the ones that didn't fall over, you can see further up that some of them have just quite simply been ripped in half. It looks like a tornado has actually hit this area. That's the kind of destruction that we're dealing with here, and it really shows why there are still 20,000 people in the area without power. Now, in addition to power, telecommunications has also been an issue with mobile towers down, particularly here in Kalorama. Residents have been very, very isolated, not being able to communicate with the outside world. And of course, because of these issues with the access, with the trees down and with communications, it's been really difficult for authorities to really get a clear picture of how much damage has been done. We do know that assessments at properties are now happening. About 600 had taken place by yesterday. 140 homes had been confirmed to have been damaged in some way, but we do expect that number to rise. We've heard in recent days a man from Kalorama yesterday telling us that in his street alone 5 or 6 houses had been smashed, so we do expect that number of houses damaged to rise. And in addition to all this physical destruction, we've also also got the mental impact, the trauma of what's happened here. We heard earlier today from the Mayor of Yarra Ranges, Fiona McAllister, who spoke to that. Here's what she had to say.
These are communities that are coming off the back of, we had storm events a couple of years ago, COVID lockdowns, so the increase in mental health issues that were already evident, and now they've got this incredible trauma of literally trees crashing down around them, and talking to families and children who are in tears, and just so that kind of emotional mental recovery will take a very long time.
Now, while we don't know as yet how many homes have been affected, we do know that as of yesterday, already 6,500 insurance claims had been lodged following last week's wild weather. The state government has also announced a relief package jointly funded by the state and federal governments. Now, there's grants of up to $42,000 available for affected Victorians. Now, that's to go to things like accommodation and to repairing homes. But judging just on the destruction that we're seeing here today, the homes that we've seen, some smashed in two pieces, some people will not be heading back to their homes for quite a long time.
Victorian health authorities are moving to contain a potential COVID-19 outbreak at an inner-city townhouse complex after identifying suspected transmission between residents. It comes as the state records 2 new locally acquired COVID-19 cases, both primary close contacts of existing infections. Reporter Leanne Wong has more.
Here in Southbank, a pop-up testing site has now been established after 2 residents living in a nearby apartment complex tested positive for the virus. Now, one of those cases is a man who tested positive over the weekend. The other case is a worker at the Arcare Maidstone aged care facility, and authorities are now saying it's likely that this townhouse and apartment complex was the likely location of how the virus transmitted between these 2 residents. Now, the state recorded 2 new locally acquired cases today, both of them being children. One of them is a child linked to the Reservoir household cluster. The other linked to this same man who tested positive over the weekend and who lives in this apartment complex on Wells Street. Now, it's understood that all residents and visitors to the complex are now being asked to get tested, to come down to this testing site to get tested, particularly if they were at the complex from June 2nd to 11th. Now, it's also currently unclear how the virus transmitted. It's understood that authorities will be looking at shared communal spaces, such as shared entrances as well as car parks. But Minister for Health Martin Foley also said that this worker from the aged care facility had in fact moved out and is currently living in hotel quarantine.
The particular case from Arcare, the worker involved has, as I understand it, taken the offer that we make to many people who test positive, that if they have concerns about them self-isolating safely at their residence, that they move into hotel quarantine. So my understanding is that's what's happening. Based on the assessment that is made as to people's ability to be able to quarantine safely at home, those circumstances are determined on a case-by-case basis.
Now, this all comes as Victoria continues to grapple with an increased demand for the coronavirus vaccine, with authorities flagging that demand is exceeding supply. Today, the state's vaccination hub said that from today, they're putting a pause on any walk-ins for the Pfizer vaccine. And one of the state's major health services, Western Health, also says that from today, they're also putting a pause on any bookings for the Pfizer vaccine, except for hotel quarantine workers, as well as residents living in high-rise accommodation. Now, this all leads to just further delays for Victorians hoping to get the jab. Hopefully those delays will be amended soon.
Benjamin Netanyahu's record 12-year run as Israel's Prime Minister has ended, but he's already vowing to return. Parliament has voted into government an unlikely team of right and left-wing parties with a razor-thin majority. But Mr Netanyahu has pledged to stay on as opposition leader and topple the fragile coalition. Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner reports.
Jubilation on the streets as Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, lost his grip on power. After months of uncertainty, Parliament voted in a new coalition government, led by 49-year-old ultra-nationalist Naftali Bennett. But Mr Netanyahu isn't going quietly.
I will lead you to a daily struggle against this bad and dangerous left-wing government in order to topple it. And with God's help, it will happen much sooner than you think.
We're
celebrating today because the protest movement has won, and Bibi Netanyahu is going home. He's leaving his office.
We worked hard to get to this moment. We are safe from dictatorship.
The new cabinet met briefly, with Mr Bennett pledging to mend rifts. Like Benjamin Netanyahu, he opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state. He also advocates annexing parts of the occupied West Bank. But the left-wing and Arab politicians in his coalition will work to keep those ambitions in check.
The Palestinian question is definitely going to bother this government. They're going to do the best they can to put the question away. I don't think that works for the long run. And this actually might come in the face of this government very soon. So that will be a major challenge on the international level.
Critics of Benjamin Netanyahu say that he's divided Israel and pushed the country further to the right. And while some here still have reservations about Naftali Bennett as Prime Minister, many simply hope that the new coalition can reunite the country.
We want something that will show everybody that Israel, one country with Arabs and Jews and right side and left side and the religion and not religion, everybody together.
But a combative Netanyahu has vowed to use every opportunity to undermine his successor and destroy the new coalition.
We'll be back soon. We'll be back.
For now, these Israelis are savouring the beginning of a country under new management. Tom Joyner, ABC News, Jerusalem.
Iraqi authorities have begun the long, painstaking process of exhuming and identifying the remains of more than 120 people from a mass grave. The site was discovered last year west of Mosul. It's close to Barush prison, where Islamic State militants killed up to 600 inmates when they seized Mosul in 2014. The remains are being taken to Baghdad for analysis in the hope that they can be identified and returned to their families for proper burial. The process is expected to take 3 months. Australians firmly agree the wealth gap in our country is too big, according to the Australia Talks national survey. Here's Casey Briggs.
Here are a handful of statements that Australians strongly agree on. The gap in wealth between rich and poor Australians is too big. CEOs of large companies are paid too much. The Australian economy works to the advantage of the rich. We tend to think people at the top had an unfair advantage getting there. 51% of us agree with that, just 32% disagree. And on that one, it doesn't matter how much you earn. Even half of people at the top think the people at the top got an unfair advantage. But we also tend to agree hard work can make you successful no matter the circumstances you were born into. Our confidence in that has taken a beating in the last couple of years, from 69% in 2019 down 12 percentage points to 57% in 2021. And it collapsed even further for younger Australians. In 2019, 65% of 18 to 24-year-olds agreed hard work can bring you success. But now, only 41% agree. And that's not a trajectory that suggests much optimism among young people about their future.
So let's unpack these numbers in more detail now. Professor Roger Wilkins is from the University of Melbourne. He says Australians have different ideas of what a fair go means.
Yeah, my judgment would be that it is about whether government policy settings are doing a good job of giving everyone an opportunity for a fulfilling life and a decent living standard. And so I suppose that's where that disquiet is coming from, is feeling that policies could be better in terms of getting a more equitable distribution of well-being, of income and wealth.
To what extent do we have a poverty cycle in Australia, and how hard is it for someone to break out of that?
Yes, we certainly do have a poverty cycle, both people who fall into poverty are much more likely, even when they escape poverty, to fall back into it. But we also see an intergenerational dimension to this too, that if you grow up in a poor family, you are considerably more likely to be poor as an adult yourself. So there is certainly quite a lot of evidence, and this is from Australian data. We have the Hilda survey, Australia's nationally representative longitudinal study, which is showing that your life opportunities are certainly shaped by the economic circumstances you grow up in. So it's certainly something that there's plenty of room for improvement on.
Now, 4 out of 5 think that the gap between rich and poor is too big. We know that it is growing. What impact is inherited wealth having on that?
Look, to date, not a great deal. Most of the wealth that we see in our community was actually generated during people's lifetimes. And the growth in wealth inequality that we have seen over the last 15 or so years has largely been an intergenerational phenomenon. We've seen a significant proportion of baby boomers in particular doing very well out of both the property market and also their superannuation and other forms of assets. And that's, I think, created a greater generational divide between younger people and particularly this baby boomer cohort. So I think that's really what's driving it. What I think is interesting, this dissatisfaction with inequality, the feeling that the gap between the rich and poor, whether you're measuring it by wealth or by income, while there's a lot of dissatisfaction with that gap, we don't seem as a community to be particularly keen on voting for policies that might reduce that gap. So it's a little bit of a conundrum as to why we don't vote for more progressive tax systems, better income support payments for welfare recipients, removal of the refundable status of dividend imputation credits, you name it. These sorts of policies don't seem to get much traction in the community. So there is a question of whether this is cheap talk, whether people like to complain about the degree of inequality in their community, but aren't really prepared to support the policies that might reduce that inequality.
And 60% of Australians say that they consider retiring comfortably a problem. Does that align with research and reality?
This is a long-standing phenomenon that people are anxious about whether they will be able to live and have an adequate living standard in retirement. What is interesting is it does seem people are more pessimistic than they need to be. That, in fact, we've seen quite an improvement in the economic well-being of retirees over the last 20 or so years. In part, that's been due to superannuation, but it's also reflected the maintaining of the age pension at a level consistent with average living, moving with wages rather than prices. So probably people do show more anxiety than they need to. For example, on measures of things like financial stress, we find that they're actually very low for retirees. The one exception I would note in that regard is that retirees who don't own their home and are reliant on the age pension, they are doing it quite tough. And of course, looking forward, the concern there is that we're looking at more and more people reaching their retirement without owning a home, and so that this is likely to become a growing problem. Although, of course, they will, to counter that, have bigger superannuation balances on average than the current crop of retirees.
How do your views compare to the survey? Just head to abc.net.au/Australia Talks to find out. A scientist, health worker, ballet dancer, movie star and magician are among the newest members of the Order of Australia, receiving Queen's Birthday Honours Awards. Also on this year's list is Benny Bol for his work in youth justice. The Sudanese-born orphan is president of the Queensland African Communities Council and works closely with police to help immigrant youth avoid crime.
My number one vision is to make sure that the community feel empowered. And then number two is investing in future leadership. In 2012, 2013, I came across so many issues involving young people from particular migrant background, refugees background. And then I was like, it seemed most of our young people don't really understand how lucky they are to be in this country. So they need somebody to work with them and to let them know that they are very lucky, because there are a lot of support services out there, a lot of generous people, many people everywhere trying to help out.
You've been nominated for this Queen's Birthday shortlist. How does that make you feel?
I feel like this can be an inspiration for other people who feel like maybe they don't belong or they don't feel welcome in Australia, when otherwise if you do something important, you could be recognized and acknowledged properly. The main challenge is around some people not engaging with the system, not understanding the system, and also feeling unwelcome. Maybe some people experiencing discrimination and racism, and then they blanket everything. Yes, I don't feel welcome, not knowing that probably 80–90% of the Australian community actually make them feel welcome. So this is some of the things that we try to address. Well, I'm very happy that I'm here to share the stories, and I appreciate the opportunity to be nominated. Thank you.
It's time for a look at what's coming up on The Drum. Here's tonight's host, Julia Baird.
Tonight, as Scott Morrison cozies up to world leaders on the beach in Cornwall, back home, coalition members break ranks over the government's treatment of a Tamil families fighting extradition. A decision on their future could be announced as early as tomorrow. And is Australia all that it's cracked up to be anyway? Young people are increasingly abandoning any hopes of owning their own home and foresee a tougher future than their parents had. All that and more coming up on The Drum. I'm Julia Baird. See you soon.
You can catch The Drum on ABC TV tonight at 6 p.m. local time, and of course anytime on ABC iView. On the satellite, a trough near the central Queensland coast is triggering showers and storms. Another trough over central Australia is also generating spots of rain and storms. A cold front crossing southwest WA is bringing gales, rain and storms. And a trough near eastern Victoria and Tasmania is causing a few showers. Looking around the country for tomorrow, for Queensland, there's a few showers in the northeast, partly cloudy in the northwest and sunny and cool in the south. For New South Wales and the ACT, it's sunny and cold in the east, mostly sunny in the northwest, with a chance of a shower and storm in the southwest. Victoria will see a late shower in the west, with early fog and cold conditions in the east. Over to Tasmania, and it's partly cloudy in the south, a few showers in the northwest, rain increasing in the northeast. In South Australia, there's a late shower in the southeast and central parts, getting cold in the west and the north, with possible rain in the northeast. In WA, there's some early rain and wind over the southwest and south, mostly sunny and hot in the north though. And in the Northern Territory, it's mostly sunny and warm, getting colder over the interior and the south. And looking ahead to Wednesday for the capital cities, partly cloudy in Brisbane, mostly sunny in Sydney, some morning frost in Canberra, partly cloudy in Melbourne, overcast in Hobart. The rain increasing throughout the day in Adelaide. There will be showers in Perth and mostly sunny in Darwin with a top of 31 degrees. You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on iView. Here are our top stories on ABC News. The federal government is understood to be on the verge of announcing a solution that would allow a Tamil asylum seeker family that's been detained for several years on Christmas Island to live freely in Australia. The Immigration Minister, Alex Hawke, has been considering intervening in the long-running legal battle by issuing the Murugapan family with visas or by allowing them to apply for a range of visas. One person has died and 2 others have been injured in a crash at the Fink Desert Race in Central Australia. Northern Territory Police received a report that a group of spectators had been struck by a vehicle competing in the off-road event. A male in his 60s died while watching the race 35 kilometres from the finish line. Another spectator in his 50s was seriously injured and flown to Alice Springs Hospital. Leaders of the world's richest countries have pledged to tackle climate change and the coronavirus pandemic at the G7 summit. The measures include delivering 1 billion vaccine doses to poorer countries. Prime Minister Scott Morrison, who was an observer at the meeting, also delivered a promise to phase out government investment in coal-fired power generation. The majority of Australians think the gap between the rich and poor is too wide. That's according to the Australia Talks survey, which found 79% of people agree the wealth gap is too big. More than 60,000 people took the survey, which aims to create an understanding of attitudes and behaviours of Australians. Let's return to one of our top stories now. A man has